Have you ever noticed that the exact same leadership traits that build a billion-dollar empire are usually the exact same traits that bankrupt it like a decade later?
Oh, yeah. It is the ultimate paradox of success, honestly.
Right. Or how, like, the meticulous attention to detail that makes a founder so brilliant can almost overnight turn them into this toxic micromanager who just actively destroys their own team.
Yeah, we love to study the grand macroscopic vision of leaders, right? Like the massive disruption, the thousand-mile journey. But when you look at the raw data, when you really dissect the postmortems of catastrophic corporate failures or, historical collapses, it is almost never a failure of grand vision.
It's something else.
Exactly. It's a failure of the microscopic. It's this complete misunderstanding of the anatomy of small things.
And that is exactly what we are tearing into today. We're doing a deep dive into this concept we're calling execution depth.
Which is such a fascinating framework.
It really is.
Yeah.
And to get there, we are looking at a stack of sources that takes ancient wisdom, specifically Chapter 64 of the Tao Te Ching, alongside the philosophy of Zhuangzi, and just ruthlessly applies it to modern pragmatic project management and systems theory.
Yeah, and I think it's important to clarify that we are not treating these texts as like abstract mystical poetry.
Definitely not.
We are reading them as hardcore manuals on execution power and organizational psychology. Today, we're really going to dissect two fundamental concepts. First, the strategy of Wei Du Qi, which roughly translates to accomplishing the great by focusing on the minute.
Right.
And second, Shen Zhongru Shi, which is the discipline of being as careful at the end as you are at the beginning.
So to you listening right now, whether you are an executive trying to integrate a new corporate acquisition, a developer managing some sprawling software architecture, or honestly just someone trying to organize a pretty chaotic personal life, this is for you.
Absolutely. It applies across the board.
We're going to elevate the intellect of this conversation. We aren't just going to tell you to take things one step at a time. We're going to look at the cognitive dissonance of leadership, the mechanics of systemic risk, and how to build environments where execution happens almost autonomously.
Yeah, and to start, we have to fundamentally restructure how we perceive the big picture. Because before you can manage any complex system, you have to accept the physical reality of how that system is actually constructed.
Okay, lay that out for us.
Well, the sources point out that human beings are cognitively wired to be terrified by scale.
Oh, I totally see that. There's a very specific kind of dread that hits you when you open a completely blank document for a major proposal.
Yes, the blank page anxiety.
Exactly. You look at the sheer scale of what needs to be done, the mountain of effort required,
Yeah.
and your brain it short circuits. You want to execute,
Hmm.
but the macroscopic vision is so overwhelmingly big that it paralyzes you.
It paralyzes you because you're attempting to compute an impossible equation. Your brain can't process the whole thing at once. And the most famous line from Chapter 64 of the Tao Te Ching illustrates this perfectly.
The journey of 1,000 miles won.
Right. It says, "A tree of a man's embrace springs from a tiny shoot. A 9-story terrace begins with a basket of dirt. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." Now, I know that last phrase is like plastered on every motivational poster in every dentist's office in the world.
Yeah, it's total cliche at this point.
It is, but we need to strip away the cliche and look at the actual underlying mechanics.
Let's do it, because when you actually read it through the lens of operations management, it's not a motivational quote at all. It's a statement of physical law.
Precisely. Big things do not exist independently, period.
Right.
A multinational corporation is not a single entity. It is a complex web of thousands of daily emails, minor financial transactions, brief interpersonal interactions.
Like a finished skyscraper isn't just dropped from the sky.
Exactly. It is quite literally just thousands of steel beams, rivets, and panes of glass arranged in a specific sequence. This is the essence of Wei Da Qi, accomplishing the great by focusing on the small.
The friction, though, comes from the cognitive dissonance of holding both realities in your head at once, right? Because you have to be the architect who sees the finished skyscraper, but you also have to be the worker turning the wrench on a single bolt.
Right, and that's incredibly hard to do. And where leaders fail is in a concept the texts call yang gao shudi. It translates to having eyes high, hands low.
Eyes high, hands low. I like that.
Yeah, it means your standards and your vision are incredibly high, but your execution ability, your actual willingness to get your hands dirty with the mundane, trivial mechanics of the work is exceptionally low.
So you want the tree of a man's embrace,
Hmm.
but you refuse to water the tiny shoot because watering a tiny sprout just feels beneath you.
Yes, exactly. You become so obsessed with the grand vision that you detach from the physical reality of how it's built. But when you shift your focus from the overwhelming final goal to the immediate microscopic next step, you trigger two mechanical changes in your workflow.
What's the first one?
First, you drastically reduce the cognitive load. You aren't asking your brain to solve a 1,000-mile logistical nightmare anymore. You're asking it to solve a one-step problem.
I can relate to this so much. I mean, I remember early in my career, I was tasked with overhauling a company's entire onboarding process. I spent weeks just staring at flowcharts, totally paralyzed.
To too much data.
Yeah. And it wasn't until a mentor told me, look, stop building the system. Just write the welcome email for day one. That's it. And suddenly the paralysis broke.
Because writing one email is a microaction. It has basically zero friction.
Hmm.
And that leads to the second mechanical change, which is systemic momentum.
Right. Once you start, it's easier to keep going.
Exactly. Once that email is written, the psychological barrier to writing the day two agenda is significantly lower. The accumulation of microactions creates a compounding momentum that a frantic big push at the deadline can just never replicate.
So we established that massive successes are literally just the compounding interest of tiny positive microactions.
Correct.
But here's where the deep dive gets a little terrifying. If that mathematical rule applies to success, the exact same mathematical rule has to apply to failure.
Oh, absolutely.
Catastrophic, world-ending failures must compound from tiny, ignored anomalies.
They do every single time. And this brings us to the realm of defensive execution or, risk management. In our sources, this is encapsulated in the concept of feng wei du jian, which means preventing the micro, stopping the gradual, or to use the common idiom, nipping it in the bud.
I love that phrase, defensive execution, because the most dangerous threats to a project or a company, they don't announce themselves with sirens blaring.
Right, they don't send you a calendar invite.
Exactly. They start as tiny, easily ignorable red flags, like a slight deviation in a metric, a minor miscommunication, a tiny compromise on a safety protocol.
And to understand the mechanics of this, the sources dive into a really fascinating historical case study from the Eastern Han Dynasty. It involves Emperor He and an official named Ding Hong. It's basically a masterclass in recognizing the sprouts of a systemic collapse.
Walk us through this, because political coups don't just happen overnight.
They really don't. So during the Han Dynasty, Emperor he ascended to the throne when he was only 10 years old.
10. Wow.
Yeah, just a kid. And because of his age, Empress Dowager Du took control of the government as regent. Now, she didn't instantly declare herself supreme ruler and execute everyone. That would be too obvious.
Yeah, she played the long game.
Exactly. She engaged in the slow, microscopic accumulation of power. She began placing her family members in positions of influence. Her brother, Dushan, became the Grand General controlling the military.
Okay, that's a big move.
It is, but then other cousins and brothers were given titles and regional posts, just, slowly filling the ranks.
And to the casual observer at the time, these probably looked like minor, isolated appointments, right? A nephew gets a job here, a brother gets a title there. It doesn't look like a forest fire. It just looks like standard nepotism.
Exactly. But the official, Ding Hong, he recognized that these were not isolated events. He saw the underlying vector. He recognized that the entire government apparatus was gradually being interwoven with the Du family network.
He saw the math of it.
Yes. And when a solar eclipse occurred, which in ancient Chinese cosmology was interpreted as a severe warning from heaven, Ding Hong seized the opportunity to submit a memorial to the young emperor.
So he used the eclipse as leverage to point out the invisible threat.
Yeah, he explicitly warned the emperor that he needed to suppress the Du family's power right then, while it was still manageable, while the threat was still in its infancy. He was advocating for a fang wei du jian.
Right. Nip it in the bud.
Because if you wait until they openly declare a rebellion, it's too late. The momentum is already too massive.
He was essentially saying, deal with the sprout before it grows roots so deep it shatters the foundation of the dynasty. And the emperor actually listened, right?
He did, yeah. Emperor Maurya, he maneuvered carefully, stripped the Du family of their military power, and completely dismantled their faction before they could launch a disastrous coup. And the sources pair this historical event with a concept from the Book of Odes, Fei Yu Chu Mu, which translates to repairing the house before it rains.
Oh, that's the poem about the owl, right?
Yes, the poem describes an owl that works tirelessly, stripping mulberry roots to repair and reinforce its nest before the storm hits. It is like the ultimate metaphor for proactive risk management.
You do not wait for the rain to start falling to fix the leak in the roof.
Exactly. You do it when the sky is completely clear, based on the logical deduction that storms are mathematically inevitable.
Okay, I have to push back here for a second, because it sounds great in a poem or an ancient dynasty. But let's talk about the modern reality of project management.
Sure, let's ground it.
If I'm managing a massive software rollout, and I am hyper-vigilant about nipping every micro-disaster in the bud, I am going to become a paranoid, exhausted wreck.
You'll burn out in a week.
Right. If I panic over every single typo in a developer Slack message or every 5-minute delay in a stand-up meeting, we will never ship the product. We'll just be paralyzed by chasing imaginary storms. So how do we distinguish between a harmless tiny detail and a literal sprout of disaster?
That is the crucial distinction, and honestly, it separates amateur managers from elite leaders. It is the difference between an isolated error and a systemic error. You must evaluate the vector of the anomaly.
Okay, explain the mechanics of that. How do I evaluate the vector?
Let's use your software rollout example. An isolated error is a developer making a typo in an internal email. It happens, the meaning is still clear, you move on. It has basically no compounding negative effect.
Right, it's just a mistake.
It is a dot on a graph with no trajectory, but a systemic error. That is your lead developer deciding to skip a mandatory code review because, well, we are in a hurry this sprint and the code looks fine.
Ah, wow. Yeah, skipping the code review is a single tiny action, and weirdly, it actually saves time in the short term.
Exactly. It takes zero effort to skip it. But that tiny action has a vector. It points toward a cliff. It represents a systemic decay in the culture of quality assurance.
Right, because if they do it once, they'll do it again.
Yes. It is a sprout that, if left unchecked, will eventually grow into a catastrophic vulnerability in the software architecture that could cost the company millions. So you don't panic over the typo, you panic over the skipped code review, and you intervene immediately with absolute authority.
It's all about looking at the trajectory. Like, if a team member is 5 minutes late to a meeting once because of traffic, that's a dot. But if they are 5 minutes late to every crucial sync meeting for a month, the 5 minutes isn't the disaster. The disaster is the systemic erosion of team accountability. You address the sprout before resentment destroys the team's morale.
Precisely. You intervene while the vector is small, requiring very little energy to correct. A quiet conversation corrects the tardiness. Waiting until the project fails because of poor communication, well, that requires a monumental, expensive crisis intervention.
So if dripping water hollows out stone, why do so many patient, consistent projects still fail right at the finish line? I mean, we've taken the first step. We are watching out for the dangerous systemic sprouts. What actually sustains the execution over a multi-year timeline?
The sources suggest the answer lies in the specific type of energy we use.
Okay, what does that mean?
It's the persistence of pace. In Taoist systems theory, the ultimate symbol of effective, sustainable execution is water. We see this in idioms like shui di shituan, meaning dripping water hollows out stone, and shi sui cheng liu, meaning a small stream flows long.
Dripping water hollows out stone. That implies that sheer force is fundamentally inferior to consistency.
It implies that consistency is the ultimate force. Let's look at the physics of it. A drop of water is incredibly soft, incredibly weak. A stone is hard and unyielding.
Right.
In a single collision, the stone wins effortlessly. But over 1 million collisions, the water carves through the stone. We often try to force our way through obstacles in business using massive, sudden expenditures of energy.
Oh, totally. We pull all-nighters. We throw millions of dollars at an advertising problem in a total panic. We scream at our vendors.
Yes, exactly.
It's basically the difference between a pressure washer and a gentle stream.
Oh, that's good. Yes, unpack that analogy.
Well, the pressure washer seems like the superior tool, right? It's loud, it's aggressive, it gets immediate results. But if you use a pressure washer on the wrong substrate, say, on old brick or delicate sandstone, you blast away the mortar. You completely destroy the very foundation you are trying to clean. Not to mention, a pressure washer inevitably runs out of gas or the motor burns out. It requires immense, unsustainable energy.
That's so true.
But the gentle stream, however, just keeps flowing day after day, year after year. It doesn't destroy the ecosystem around it. It shapes it. It carves the Grand Canyon.
That is a phenomenal upgrade to the metaphor, because the damage the pressure washer does to the substrate is exactly what coercive management does to team morale and community relations.
Wow.
And our sources provide a really profound modern case study that perfectly illustrates this difference. It is the Chi County Water Management Project in Taiwan, led by Professor Lee Hom Yarn.
Okay, this was easily the most compelling part of the reading. We need to spend some real time on this. Set the stage for us. What were the mechanics of the crisis in Chiyi County?
It was a massive, multi-layered ecological and economic crisis. Chi County is a coastal region. And due to rising sea levels, combined with decades of extensive pumping of underground water by local fish farmers for their aquaculture ponds, the area was experiencing severe land subsidence.
The ground was literally sinking.
Literally sinking. Every time there was a heavy rain or a typhoon, the area suffered catastrophic flooding. Homes were destroyed, livelihoods were threatened. It was just a completely untenable situation.
And the traditional government bureaucracy approach to this is pure pressure washer.
Exactly. The traditional approach is highly coercive. The government assesses the risk, declares the area a disaster zone, passes a law, and uses eminent domain to forcibly evict the fish farmers so they can build massive concrete seawalls.
Which mathematically might solve the flooding, but sociologically it creates a war zone. You are dealing with families who have farmed that land for generations.
Yeah.
If you show up with bulldozers and eviction notices, you're going to face protests, lawsuits, massive political fallout, and deep generational resentment. The stone of civilian resistance is incredibly hard.
Precisely. If you hit that stone with the pressure washer of government authority, you fracture the entire community. But Professor Lee and his team adopted a fundamentally different operational philosophy. They utilized the water approach.
How do you do that?
They recognized that the resistance of the fish farmers was a natural reality, not an enemy to be destroyed. So they initiated what Professor Lee described as hundreds of hours of dialogue.
Hundreds of hours. That sounds exhausting. Let's break down the mechanics of that dialogue, because it wasn't just them walking into a town hall and giving a PowerPoint presentation. How do hundreds of hours of listening actually dissolve the stone of resistance?
It requires understanding the concept of Meicheng Zaiji, good things take time, bad things happen too fast to fix. Rushing a forced eviction is a bad thing happening fast. The dialogue was the slow accumulation of a good thing. Initially, the team faced extreme hostility. The farmers were terrified of losing their livelihoods. But Professor Lee's team didn't argue back with authority. They listened to the fear. They absorbed the anger without retaliating.
That is the water absorbing the impact of the stone.
Yes.
They let the farmers vent the emotional pressure until the conversation could finally shift from "you are taking my land" to "how do we actually survive the next typhoon?"
Exactly. And once that emotional barrier was lowered, once the water had softened the sharp edges of the stone, the team began to introduce alternatives slowly. They explained the hydrologic reality that the land was going to sink regardless. Then they offered a visionary pivot.
What was the pivot?
The government could rent the sunken land to create a massive wetland conservation park.
But that still leaves the farmers without jobs, doesn't it?
That is where the deep execution comes in. They didn't just offer to buy the land. They offered to fund and train the fish farmers to transition their careers into the leisure, ecotourism, and hospitality businesses that the new wetland park would generate.
Wow.
Yeah, they became guides, bed and breakfast operators, and conservationists.
That is incredible, because they took the time, because they used the dripping water approach of relentless empathetic dialogue. They didn't just build a seawall. They engineered a complete socioeconomic transformation.
They really did.
They solved the ecological crisis, built a new wetland park, and created sustainable, profitable livelihoods for the community.
It is a flawless execution of Sun Tzu Jinjin's step-by-step progress. They avoided the fatal trap of Yusu Buddha, which means haste makes waste, or literally, desiring speed prevents attainment. True execution depth requires immense emotional regulation from the leader. It requires the discipline to pace yourself, to deliberately refuse the pressure washer, even when your superiors are demanding immediate results, because you know the stream is what will actually solve the systemic problem.
The emotional regulation to not rush. That's powerful.
Yeah.
But this leads us right into a massive contradiction in the source material.
Yeah.
A paradox that I think every single manager, founder, or even parent struggles with on a daily basis.
Ah, yes, the paradox of control.
Yes. Okay, let's look at the cognitive dissonance here. We just spent the first half of this deep dive establishing that you absolutely must obsess over the tiny details. You have to evaluate the vectors of micro errors. You have to nip the systemic sprouts in the bud.
Right.
You must focus on the minute to achieve the great. But then, in the exact same breath, these texts turn around and vehemently warn against micromanaging.
It is the central tension of Taoist leadership theory.
Right. The texts advocate for Wu Wei Erzi, which translates to governing through non-action, and Exing Beyond Jijel, teaching without words or leading by example.
Yes.
But let me give you a real-world pushback here. Let's say I am an engineering manager at a tech startup. We have a massive Q3 product launch. My engineers are stressed, and they are starting to ship buggy code.
Okay.
If I practice governing through non-action and just sit on my hands, the product crashes, the company loses its funding, and we all get fired. How does stepping back help me execute?
That is a brilliant pushback because it highlights the most common misunderstanding of Wu Wei. Wu Wei does not mean negligence. It does not mean doing nothing while the house burns down.
Okay, then what does it mean?
It means doing nothing that is forced, unnatural, or overly controlling. It means eliminating friction. A good leader, according to this philosophy, is not a taskmaster. They are an environment builder.
An environment builder. Okay, let's explore the mechanics of that.
If a leader tries to control every single granular detail of their subordinates' work, which the Tao Te Ching warns against with the phrase duo yan shu kong, meaning too many words lead to exhaustion, you trigger a psychological breakdown in the team.
Yeah, nobody likes that.
When you micromanage the formatting of an engineer's code or dictate the exact phrasing of a sales rep's email, you strip them of their autonomy.
And when you strip away autonomy, you kill intrinsic motivation.
Exactly. They become passive. They stop looking for creative solutions because they know you were just going to overwrite their work anyway. They regress into a state of learned helplessness, just waiting for your exact orders.
Right.
And suddenly you, the manager, are the bottleneck for the entire company. You are exhausted, and your team is totally disengaged.
So how do we reconcile this? How do I obsess over details without micromanaging the people?
To understand the mechanics of this balance, we have to look at one of the most famous, profound stories from the Zhuangzi, the story of Butcher Ding, or Pao Ding Jin Yu.
The butcher, who was so skilled at cutting up oxen that his work looked and sounded like a beautiful choreographed dance.
Yes. In the story, Lord Wenhui observes Butcher Ding and is just astonished by his effortless execution. He asks Ding how his skill has reached such an incredible, almost supernatural level.
What does he say?
Ding explains the evolution of his perception. He says that when he first started cutting up oxen, all he saw was the massive, overwhelming whole of the ox. It was a terrifying big picture.
Right, the blank page paralysis again.
Exactly. But after 3 years of practice, he no longer saw the whole ox. He saw the distinct parts.
He broke the macroscopic down into the microscopic.
Correct. But then he says something really profound. He says, "Now I do not look with my eyes. My perception stops and my spirit moves where it wants. I rely on the heavenly patterns."
Meaning what, exactly?
He has internalized the natural anatomy, the intricate spaces between the joints and the muscles.
And the most vital technical detail in this story is the blade of his cleaver, right?
Yes. The blade is the crucial metaphor for execution. Ding explains that a good butcher has to change his blade once a year because he cuts through muscle. A mediocre butcher has to change his blade once a month because he hacks at the bone.
Ouch.
But Butcher Ding has used the exact same blade for 19 years, cutting up thousands of oxen, and the edge is as razor sharp as if it just came off the grindstone.
Because he never actually hits the bone.
Exactly. He explains that the joints have spaces within them, and the blade of his cleaver has basically no thickness. He simply guides the completely frictionless blade into the empty spaces, following the natural pre-existing structure of the ox. He doesn't force his way through the obstacle, he finds the space around it.
Okay, this is beautiful philosophy, but let's translate Butcher Ding back to my struggling tech startup.
Right.
How does finding the spaces between the joints help me manage buggy code without becoming a toxic micromanager?
Butcher Ding represents ultimate execution depth. He knows the microscopic details of the ox intimately, every single joint, every tendon. But he does not use a pressure washer. He doesn't hack. In project management, this brings us back to Shenzong Ru's careful at the end as at the beginning.
Right.
Being extremely careful and detail-oriented does not mean hovering over your developer's shoulders with a red pen.
So what are the details I should be obsessing over then?
You obsess over the system, you manage the framework. Your failure at the tech startup wasn't that you stepped back. Your failure was that you never built the proper environment in the first place.
Oh, I see.
The microscopic details you must relentlessly control are the parameters of the ecosystem. Like, are the strategic goals crystal clear?
Yeah.
Is the automated QA testing protocol incredibly rigorous? Does the team have the exact computing resources they need?
That makes a lot of sense.
And culturally, is the psychological safety of the engineering department high enough that they can admit to bugs without fear of retribution?
It's the sandbox analogy.
Yes. Walk
Yeah.
us through the sandbox.
Well, if I am the manager, my job is to build the absolute best sandbox structurally possible. I source the highest quality sand. I sift through it meticulously to ensure there are absolutely no shards of glass or sharp rocks in it. I reinforce the wooden wall so it doesn't collapse. I provide the best ergonomic buckets and shovels.
Right.
That is where my intense, obsessive attention to detail goes. I build an immaculate environment.
And then what do you do?
Then I step totally out of the sandbox. I let the engineers get in, and I let them play. I let them build whatever sand castle they want, however they want to build it. I don't jump into the box and rip the shovel out of their hands because they're building a moat differently than I would.
That is exactly it. This is the operational strategy of Zuoda Fangzhou, grasp the big, let go of the small.
Grasp the big, let go the small.
Yes, you maintain an iron grip on the systemic framework, the culture, and the ultimate vision, but you completely let go of the micromanagement of the daily tasks. You let the people operate freely within the perfectly designed system.
That is a massive paradigm shift. It completely redefined what it means to be a detail-oriented leader.
It really does.
You aren't detail-oriented about their specific work outputs.
Yeah.
You are aggressively detail-oriented about the environment that makes their work outputs possible.
This embodies the concept of Shanru Shui, the highest good, is like water. Water benefits all things, provides the necessary nourishment for life, and naturally sinks to the lowest place to support them.
So you're leading from the bottom, in a way.
As a leader, you sink beneath your team. You support the foundation. You provide the endless flow of resources and clear the obstacles, but you do not compete with them, and you certainly do not do their jobs for them. You let them find their own natural flow within the ecosystem you constructed.
Okay, this is brilliant. So let's map out where we are. We've bypassed the paralysis of the big picture by focusing on micro-actions. We've evaluated the vectors of systemic sprouts and nipped risks in the bud. We've paced ourselves like a flowing stream instead of a pressure washer. And we've built a flawless, self-sustaining ecosystem for our team where we manage the environment, not the people. The project is humming. The goal is in sight. Are we safe? Have we achieved true execution depth?
Not yet. In fact, we are about to face the final and undoubtedly the most insidious trap that destroys great achievements.
The boss level, what is it?
The inability to know when to call a project done. The ultimate discipline in execution is knowing when to stop.
Let's really explore the mechanics of this. Because in modern business culture, particularly in tech and finance, the concept of done just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
There is only scale.
Right. It's always more, more, more.
If you hit your quarterly target, the reward is a higher target next quarter. If you capture 20% of the market, the board demands you immediately go for 40. The very idea of stopping seems heretical to the modern growth mindset.
It is heretical to a pure growth at all costs mindset. But from the perspective of systemic sustainability and systems theory, which is what the Tao Te Ching is fundamentally mapping out, endless, unchecked expansion is a literal death sentence.
Wow, a death sentence.
The texts highlight the critical concept of Ziji Budai, which translates to knowing when to stop avoids danger.
Knowing when to stop avoids danger. It implies that moving forward past the finish line isn't just unnecessary, it's actively toxic.
It is actively toxic, and this is paired with Quashen Quatai abandoning the extreme and the excessive.
Okay.
When we analyze modern corporate postmortems, we find that a staggering number of enterprises do not collapse because they lack resources, talent, or market fit. They collapse from blind expansion.
It's going too fast.
They collapse from a terrifying phenomenon known as scope creep and an endless, insatiable greed that pushes the system past its structural breaking point.
You know, I think we need a stronger metaphor here than the usual, like blowing up a balloon until it pops. Because that implies it's just a little mistake of too much air. Scope creep in a massive project is much darker than that. It's more like biological cancer.
Ooh. That is a very precise analogy. Unpack the mechanics of that comparison.
Well, in biology, cellular growth is amazing. It's
Yep.
how we heal, it's how we grow from a tiny shoot into a tree. But healthy cells have a built-in mechanism called Apoptosis-programmed cell death.
Right.
They know when to stop dividing so the organ functions perfectly. Cancer is simply cellular growth that has lost the knowledge of stopping. It lacks Zijibude. The cells forget how to stop. They just keep relentlessly dividing to scale, and in doing so, they consume all the resources and eventually kill the host organism.
That is a brilliant, hauntingly accurate visualization of corporate scope creep. Endless expansion without a stopping point is malignant.
It really is.
When a project is highly successful, the immediate temptation for a leader is to tack on 5 more features, to take the profits and instantly expand into a foreign territory they don't understand, to look at the team that just sprinted an incredibly grueling marathon to hit the Q4 deadline and tell them, "Great job, the new sprint starts tomorrow."
And that's exactly how you kill the host organism. I mean, every project manager knows the visceral nightmare of scope creep. You finish the core deliverable. The client or the CEO looks at it, loves it, and says, oh, while you're at it, since the team is working so well, can we just add this one little AI integration, just a tiny feature?
Oh, it's never just a tiny feature.
No. And then another and another until the clean, beautiful project becomes a bloated, unmanageable monster. It's 6 months overdue, the budget is blown, and the top engineers quit from burnout.
This is exactly where the philosophical discipline of Gongcheng Buju becomes a vital operational tool. It means accomplishing the task, but not claiming the credit or dwelling on it.
So how do you apply that practically?
In a pragmatic project sense, it means that when the defined structural goal is achieved, you must actively detach from it. You declare victory, you secure and stabilize the gains, and you forcefully hit the brakes. You do not let the ego's addiction to the momentum of more push the system into the red zone.
So from a systems thinking perspective, stopping isn't passive. It's not giving up, and it's not resting on your laurels. Stopping is an active, aggressive management decision.
It is.
It takes immense courage to tell a board of directors, no, we are not adding that feature. We have reached the destination.
Exactly. Going back to our initial quote, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Yes, the micro-action gets you moving, but a journey of 1,000 miles also implies a specific geographic destination.
Right.
If you reach the 1,000-mile mark, the city you were aiming for, and you just keep walking past it into the desert because you are addicted to the physical act of walking well, you aren't on a journey anymore. You're just lost.
That is incredibly profound. The sheer discipline required to look at a wildly successful system and say, this is complete. We are not expanding the scope. We are stopping, and we are letting the success solidify.
It is the only way a complex system survives long-term. You must respect the biological and mechanical cycle of exertion and rest, of rapid expansion and quiet consolidation.
Let's weave this all back together because we have covered some incredibly dense, transformative territory today.
We really have.
We started by confronting the cognitive dread of the microscopic vision. We learned that staring at the finished skyscraper paralyzes us, but understanding that reality is just an accumulation of microactions empowers us. We break the friction by just writing the first email.
And from there, we explored the mechanics of defensive execution. We learned to identify the trajectory, the vector of a small error. By distinguishing between an isolated typo and a systemic sprout, like skipping a code review, we can nip disasters in the bud without devolving into paranoid micromanagement.
We looked at the persistence of pace, replacing the violent damaging force of the pressure washer with the sustainable shaping power of the stream. We saw in the Chi County example how hundreds of hours of empathetic listening can literally dissolve the stone of civilian resistance.
Transforming an ecological crisis into a socio-economic triumph.
Exactly. Then we navigated the paradox of control through the lens of Butcher Ding. We redefined what it means to be detail-oriented, shifting the focus from micromanaging the team's output to obsessively engineering an immaculate environment, building the perfect sandbox, and then letting the team find their natural flow within it.
And finally, we confronted the boss level, the ultimate discipline of Jijibudai. We recognize that endless scaling is malignant and that active, courageous stopping is required to prevent our projects from consuming themselves.
It all circles back to the very first tension we discussed, the paralysis of the blank page, the fear of execution. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a specific strategic challenge based on this deep dive. I want you to apply systems thinking to your world right now. Think of that one massive project, that daunting corporate restructuring, or that terrifying blank document you're currently avoiding. I want you to strip away the end goal entirely. Forget the skyscraper.
Just forget it for now.
Tomorrow morning, look at your workflow and ask yourself 2 questions. First, Are you playing the role of the pressure washer or the gentle stream with your team? Second, what is the absolute smallest, most trivial first step you can take the moment this audio ends? But take it a step further. Find just one sprout of a systemic issue, not a one-off mistake, but a tiny crack in your culture's foundation, and address it quietly before the storm hits.
That's the real work.
Take that tiny step, fix that tiny crack. And as you do, remember that water eventually cuts through solid stone, not with violent force, but with quiet, unstoppable persistence.